Earlier this week, we talked about why you don't need to plan everything before August. You need a repeatable starting point. One strong unit, one lesson structure, one system you can build from. And if that resonated with you, good. Because today we're getting more specific. Because here's what I know happens after a teacher hears, just start with one unit. They sit down, open their standards, and immediately think, okay, but which one? Every course feels urgent. Every class could be improved. Every unit has gaps. And that's usually the moment where teachers either freeze, bounce between courses, or spend the whole summer reorganizing without actually finishing anything. So today, I'm giving you a framework for choosing your first unit without spiraling into trying to plan everything at once. Because the goal isn't to perfectly sequence your entire year. The goal is to find your first domino. Welcome to the Secondary Teacher Podcast, the podcast for middle and high school teachers juggling multiple preps to get the strategies to reduce overwhelm so that you don't have to choose between being an effective teacher and prioritizing important relationships. I'm your host, Khristen, a 10-year high school engineering teacher, former middle school assistant principal, and teacher coach. Every week, we will discuss strategies, systems, and time-saving tips to help you not only survive but thrive as a multiple prep teacher. To take you back into my CAD mechanical drafting class. If you've never taught a CTE course, here's what you need to know. There's no pacing guide. Nobody hands you a roadmap and says, teach this in this order. You get a list of standards organized into strands and you figure out the rest yourself. That's even if you are given standards, which sounds fine until you're staring at that list thinking, where do I even start? For my CAD class, strand 1 was all about careers. Industry overview, what engineers do, why this field matters. And strand 2 was the engineering design process. On paper, you'd start with strand 1. It's listed first, it's the introduction, but I never started there. And here's why. In an elective course, especially when students can still drop in the first few weeks, leading with careers is a risk. Students chose your class for a reason. They want to make something, they want to do something. If the first slide deck is about what engineers do for a living, you will lose them before you ever get a chance to hook them. So I led with the engineering design process instead. Not because it was listed first, because I knew two things. One, I could bring everything back to it all year long. Every project, every problem, every time a student got stuck, the design process was the anchor. And two, it was hands-on from day one. Students were doing something. And in an elective classroom, that matters more in September than almost anything else. That decision wasn't just curriculum strategy. It was retention strategy. And once I understood that, choosing my starting unit stopped feeling like a guessing game. You don't choose your first unit based on urgency. You don't choose it based on the order it's listed. You choose it based on leverage. That's the shift. And here are 3 questions to help you find it. Question 1, what unit supports everything else? This is your foundational question. Not what comes first in the standards, but what concept creates the strongest foundation for the rest of the course? For me, that was the engineering design process. Even if students forgot specific projects by May, if they understood the process behind the work, I could keep coming back to it. It became the thread that ran through everything. That's what you're looking for. A repeatable concept, a transferable skill, a structure students will keep using long after the unit is over. Foundational units reduce your workload later because you reteach less, redirect less, and students have something to anchor to when things get hard. So look at your standards and ask, which one of these is everything else built on? Start there. Question 2, what unit has the highest instructional value? This is where I want to share a teacher tip that not enough people talk about, especially for CT teachers in states with end of course exams. At the bottom of Utah's CT standards, there's a breakdown. It tells you how many questions on the EOC exam come from each strand. And here's what I noticed. The strands with the most questions were almost always the foundational ones, the big rock standards, the concepts students absolutely needed to understand before everything else made sense. So if you have an EOC exam, go look at the breakdown right now. It's one of the clearest signals you have for which standards carry the most weight. And even if you don't have an EOC exam, the question still applies. If students left your course remembering only one unit, what would you want that unit to be? Not the easiest unit, not the most fun unit, not necessarily the first standard listed, the most important one. That's where your planning energy should go first. Question 3. What unit can become repeatable? This is the one most secondary teacher tips skip entirely, and it might be the most important one for multiple prep teachers. You don't just want a good unit, you want a unit that helps you build systems, because sustainable teacher planning is not about creating isolated lessons, it's about creating structures you can reuse across units, across courses, across years. So as you're building, start noticing what lesson flow works well here, what activities could repeat with different content, what structures reduce the number of decisions I have to make next time. Because once you build one strong unit with repeatable systems inside it, planning the next unit gets dramatically easier. This is exactly why Introduce, Practice, Produce framework matters so much for multiple prep teachers. And it's something I'll be going much deeper on later in this series. But start thinking about it now. Does your first unit have a clear shape that you could repeat? If yes, you're already building something sustainable. I want to come back to something I mentioned earlier in my story because I think it deserves its own moment. If you're an elective teacher or a CT teacher, your first unit is not just a curriculum decision, it's a retention decision. Students in elective courses are still deciding if they want to be there. Some of them chose your class because it sounded interesting. Some chose it because their friend was in it. Some chose it because it fit their schedule. And in those first few weeks, especially if they can still drop, you are making a case for why your class is worth their time. Leading with the most engaging, hands-on, relevant content you have isn't dumbing it down. It's smart sequencing. So if you're looking at your standards and the first one listed feels dry or administrative, careers, safety, industry overview, ask yourself honestly, is this the right place to start? Or is there a unit further down the list that would hook students faster and create a stronger foundation? You are allowed to make that call. Nobody is going to hand you the right sequence. That's the reality of being a secondary teacher without a provided curriculum. But that also means you have more control than you think. Here's what I want you to walk away with today. Choosing your first unit is not about following the list. It's about finding that concept that supports everything else you'll teach, carries the most instructional weight, and creates a structure you can repeat. And if you teach an elective or a CTE course, it's also about choosing something that makes students want to stay. That's your first domino. Find that unit, build it well, finish it before you move to anything else. Because one strong unit, really strong, does more for your teacher productivity and your teacher work-life balance this summer than a half-finished course ever will. Next week, we're talking about something that hits close to home for a lot of elected teachers. What do you do when you have standards but absolutely no curriculum to work from? If that's your reality, you're not going to want to miss it. If you want help mapping this out, grab the free secondary teacher planning calendar in the show notes. It breaks down planning into manageable pieces and gives you a structure for building that first unit without trying to tackle everything at once. The Unit Planning Lab waitlist is also in the show notes. Grab your spot for early access when doors open. Finish something that makes tomorrow lighter. I'll see you next week.